Hi everyone, I'm Susan Hatcher. I'm assistant principal at Carthage Intermediate Centre, and I also teach a little special education group as well in reading. I previously taught dance and PE in the United Kingdom. I worked quite extensively with special education students there. Obviously, had to do a lot of adaptive physical education. So here I am to talk to you about supporting special education students. Was originally going to talk about differentiation specifically, but when it came down to it, and when I think about it, differentiation is just one piece of a bigger puzzle. And so, not only that, but there's not really a set standard of tools that you can apply to a lesson and just go, voila, I've differentiated. So, instead of giving you a couple of things that may or may not work, I want to just look at some frameworks and ideas that look at the students and the lesson as a whole that will hopefully empower you to think critically about how you're designing your lessons and that will allow you to make some choices that will meet the needs of all learners, whether you're in a kindergarten classroom, a 12th grade classroom, PE, or social studies. Okay, so our goal today is to just gain a basic understanding of some inclusion strategies and resources to help plan for those special education students. We're going to talk a little bit about the IEP, of course, accommodations and modifications, differentiation, as I discussed, and universal design for learning. And I'm sorry if you've come across these things in other classes. I know through going through MSSU, the Exceptional Child course, that they do a really good job of introducing you to these things. So I do apologize if there's any information that's kind of doubled up. Okay, so individualized education program, that's what we're going to look at first. And I just wanted to make a plug to make sure that when you have students in your class who have an IEP, you do request the whole IEP. I know that when I first started teaching over here, special education teachers would send me a summary, which was great, it was helpful, but it only gave me the accommodations. Well, that's only one piece of the puzzle because accommodations come through from the present levels and from the goals. And so it's super important to know the rationale and the context of each of your students and where those accommodations are coming from. Otherwise, it makes it really difficult to plan. And if a specific accommodation isn't quite working, you want to have the knowledge and ability to be able to go and search for other accommodations and try some things out. Okay, key areas to look at. I've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but present levels of academic and functional performance. That's where special education case managers and teachers are going to be writing a narrative about what's been going on with the child in the last year or so. It's also going to be where parents document concerns, and they should be writing about how they are functioning academically and general behavior and adaptive skills. Do they struggle with getting their things organized? Are they making friends? Are they social? Things like that. And that's going to give you a clue into some of their needs that you might have to plan for in the classroom. Another area that's super important to look at is goals and progress monitoring. You may not be specifically in charge of managing those goals, but it absolutely should be a team effort. If you are in an ELA classroom and a student is struggling with reading fluency and that's one of their goals, that's something that you definitely need to know. Something at my level that comes up a lot is actually handwriting. So we have students that have occupational therapy goals for being able to write the alphabet in a minute, and they have specific OT needs that prevent them from being able to do that. And often I have teachers coming to me saying, I need them to write this 5-paragraph essay, and they're just refusing. Okay, have you looked at their goals? Do you notice something there? Do you recognize that if we are struggling to write the alphabet, we're really going to struggle to write a 5-paragraph essay? And that's where accommodations and looking at other ways that students can disseminate information to you is going to be super helpful. The other area, of course, to look at is accommodations. In an IEP, this is usually broken down into classroom accommodations, district testing accommodations and state accommodations as well, for your map test. And that's where the team will come together and look at what things are best going to help students access the general education curriculum. It is a legal plan, please remember that. And so services that they receive, so when they have to leave your classroom, maybe, or there is a co-teacher in the class, those accommodations, any behavior intervention plans, they all must be implemented. And I know firsthand it can be really frustrating when students are leaving your class to go to speech sessions or OT or PT, or they're leaving your class to go to a resource reading room. But please understand that that is a legal service that has to be provided. A team decided that that was appropriate. And so it really is important that they get those things. Okay, accommodations. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So first of all, I just want to look specifically at accommodations versus modifications, because there is often a little bit of confusion. And I'm going to tell you right now that I work with a lot of special education teachers and have worked with a lot of them. And this sometimes gets confusing for them too. And I've heard it muddled up quite a bit with them as well. So do not feel bad if you do get it muddled up, because it's across the board. But there are some very subtle differences between the two, and it's quite an important distinction. So accommodations are supports and services that help a student access the general education curriculum. And the key part to remember about accommodations is that they level the playing field. You are not changing what the expectation for learning is with the child at all. You are maybe just changing the way some materials are presented or the way a child can respond. And that's a very key difference to a modification, which actually changes the content and the requirement that you are expecting from them. So it would be the difference, as a really broad, basic example of, say you're working on multiplication in one classroom, giving them a multiplication chart where they still have to find the answer, that would be considered an accommodation. But if you actually ask the student to just focus on addition instead, because they're really struggling with this concept of multiplication, so all I want you to do is work on addition, that would be a modification. And there's been a lot of research about special education students and how they make progress, and how at the moment, special education can be seen as a little bit of a life sentence. We struggle to exit students, and part of the reason behind that is because oftentimes what has happened and what is happening is that the expectation for learning is modified so much that students never are exposed to tier 1 learning expectations. And so if you think of it like this way, if you are in a 8th grade classroom and you are only presenting 5th grade material to that special education student, then they're never exposed to those grade level expectations. So when they move on to 9th grade, they are still working at that 5th, now maybe 6th grade level. And so that's really important to remember, because when we modify, it changes what they are exposed to and can limit their capacity to learn. Modifications are important, but they are supposed to be identified and given and provided by a special education teacher for that reason, because as an IEP team, you have got together, you have decided that this is an appropriate modification for this particular student and their individual needs. So general education teachers, mostly you are responsible for providing accommodations. Just be very, very careful that you're not inadvertently modifying the expectations in the material, because that can have some consequences that are unintended for the students. I don't know if I'm going to send her some links, your teacher, to put this in, but I think you have access to the slide, or you should do at least. But if you go ahead and click on this right now, you are going to get access to a little accommodations modifications quiz, just a little bit of fun in a game show style. That right now, but test yourself. Can you recognize the difference between an accommodation and modification? I must say I spent a nice 10 minutes or so out of my day the other day being very distracted by that game show, so enjoy. Okay, so there are four types of accommodation if we dig into it a little bit deeper. Oftentimes with IEPs, you'll see kind of the same accommodations cycling through over and over again. That's great, but accommodations should be individualized. And sometimes I think we forget about the range of accommodations, or you will end up providing accommodations in the class naturally just from looking at what students need and wanting to support them. And then when it comes down to the IEP meeting, you forget that you actually provide this accommodation that will absolutely be useful for teachers next year. And so it's really worth just considering the different types of accommodations, and I'm going to show you a resource of where you can find some more to help you with this as well. So number one, presentation. That is an accommodation on how they receive the information, so whether it's verbally, visually, or any other way mode of presentation. The next type of accommodation is in how students respond, so that's how they're going to show what they know. So, for example, if you are in a social studies class and students are expected to take a written test, consider, do they need to be able to write the answers, or could they record them on a recording device? Could you listen to them and perhaps scribe the answers for them? If they're writing a book report, could they convey the information through art or a comic book or something like that? Does it have to just be an essay? So an accommodation can be in how they actually respond to what you need them to. The third type of accommodation is the setting, and that relates to the physical environment and whether it's accessible. Think about if you have a student with who is using a wheelchair, what might that look like? Look at your desk arrangements, your seating. Can you provide the accommodation of being closer to the front of the class so that they can see the board better? Maybe the accommodation is that they have to lie on the floor for some vestibular control with their writing and their focus. And the last one is scheduling, and this is looking at time demands and schedules. Oftentimes, the accommodation you will see that relates to this is extended time during tests or classroom assignments. That's a very common one. Sometimes students just need a little bit of extra thought and thinking time, or if they struggle with writing, they might need time to just be able to get their thoughts out and be able to write it out effectively. So again, these things are changes that don't change the underlying or overall goal and objective. And there are many, many examples of accommodations that you can add to your class to make things easier and more accessible. One of those things that I was telling you about is Accommodation Central. I'm just going to click on this to show you. So you can search for accommodations here. Where is it? Where do I go? I'm just going to press here. That's it. And you can see here, you can look at academic need, or you can choose functional need. We've got some needs up here that you can look at. I'm going to go back to academic. And so if we look at writing, I'm just going to pick that one up because I know that that's a big one in our school. And I'm just going to click on find accommodations. And here, this website will provide you a bunch of different kinds of accommodations. And if I click on one of these sentence stems, it gives you a little bit of information about what it is. Be careful with allowable on the state assessment because I'm not sure that this is specifically from Missouri, so you wouldn't want to check on that. But it does provide examples of what that accommodation is. And in some of them, maybe in this one, yep, there is a video of that in action. And it doesn't have videos for all of the accommodations. I did have a look, but it will give you a rundown of how to implement the accommodation. And in some of them, there are downloadable resources that you can also use to help you with that as well. So just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on this one. Super useful resource for different accommodations if you're struggling to find something. And just thought that that might be helpful. Okay, so that was one. And then the other one, classroom accommodations at a glance. So obviously, if you have students with IEPs in your class, they're going to come with some set accommodations, and that can be quite difficult for teachers to process through on the daily. And so what is suggested, what's been helpful for some of our teachers is if you write the student names down the side here, You can just check mark some of their accommodations here so that when you are giving an assignment, you can quickly look down the list and identify, okay, who needs a calculator? These kids, and just make sure that you're always providing the accommodations that are written in the IEP. So that's another just strategy that might help you to organize accommodations, which can be quite difficult when you've got several of them. So differentiation, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and like I said, I wasn't going to make this whole presentation on differentiation because I kind of wanted to look at it in terms of a framework instead. So differentiation is about tailoring the instruction to meet the learning needs of your students. You can differentiate in 4 different areas, and it's going to sound very similar to accommodations and universal design for learning as well. So the 4 areas: content, process, product, and learning environment. If we dig into content, this is why I don't like really digging into differentiation too much, because for me, when we look at content specifically, this is where a lot of unintentional modification happens. And like, again, me very personally, just very big on making sure special education students, well, all students, receive access to tier 1 learning experiences. So when I talk to my teachers about differentiation in terms of content, what I always try and get them to think about is really defining their goals for learning. And I always ask them to think about, when they're planning lessons, the very first question that they should ask is, what do I need all students to learn by the end of the lesson? That is probably the most important question when it comes to planning and teaching that you could possibly ask. I know so many teachers, including myself sometimes, that I've done this. I got caught in this loop when I was a new teacher. I would go straight to the activities that students were going to do. Take a step back, take a breath, ask yourself, first of all, what do I need my students to learn by the end of the lesson? Because everything to do with your lesson surrounding that should be based on that. And if you don't have that fundamental understanding and knowledge of what you want them to learn, it's going to take you so much time to try and put together the materials and resources that you need, because you're just going to be kind of pulling from air. So that's just a really important thing I want to convey to you. Ask yourself all the time, what exactly do I want them to learn? The next question that is super important that I jump to is not, okay, what are the activities? I know what I want them to learn, so I'm going to give them activities. I actually jump to the end and I think, how are they going to show me that they've learned what I need them to? So if I want them to, by the end of the lesson, know some particular vocabulary, very basic, how exactly are they going to show me that they've learned that vocabulary? Well, maybe I need them to learn, maybe I need them to put that vocabulary in a sentence verbally. Maybe I need them to write a paragraph that includes that vocabulary. Maybe I need them to label some pictures. And that's where universal design for learning is also going to come in. But this is where this idea of differentiation comes in, because it might be that there are several different ways that they can show you that learning. And that's why we want to think of that next, because you are going to be able to hit lots of different needs if you have the idea of, this is what I want them to learn, and these are the different ways that they could show me. So just something to consider there in terms of differentiation. The product, how will they show you that they're going to learn? Next step is that process, how students learn what you need them to. And that is where your activities come in. And that's where differentiation, again, can come in. So you might hear people talking about learning styles. Interestingly, was talking to the principal today, because we've had a big chat recently about learning styles and how actually all of that research has kind of been debunked a little bit. Of course, it's important to consider learning styles, but actually the brain learns in multiple ways, and you may have a preference, but it doesn't mean that you should just focus on that to the exclusion of all the others. Actually, research shows is that students who struggle with learning, students with dyslexia and autism and other disabilities, actually do really well with multimodal types of learning. So if they can do it kinesthetically, visually, and through auditory means, then it's more likely to go into their brain. So not just focusing on one type. So process is about how students learn what you need them to. So if I'm taking my vocabulary example, I know that I want them to be able to label some pictures, or I want them to be able to use it in a sentence verbally. How am I going to get them to that point? So I might teach them to say the words. I might show them some videos that help define the words. I might do a reading where we highlight the key words and we look at context clues, multiple ways of how they're going to learn those specific words, so that hopefully when they get to it, they're going to be able to produce what I need them to at the end. And then the final thing, learning the learning environment. What is the physical arrangement of the space to promote that learning? Again, very similar to the accommodation of setting. So how that environment is made accessible. Can they be standing up whilst doing it? Can they be lying down? All of those things are considerations, and focusing on those things are what goes into differentiation. Okay, so universal design for learning. And again, this is going to be very, very similar to differentiation. It is slightly different. Honestly, really, I think that the people that proposed, and this is just me, I'm just kind of talking off the bat now. I think that the people that really focused on differentiation were different to the people that came up with universal design for learning. And they said that they were just different to make it easier. And philosophically, there is a very slight difference, but it is only very slight. So I generally think that if you focus on UDL, you're also going to be naturally differentiating. And if you're thinking about differentiation, you're naturally going to be thinking along the lines of the UDL framework. But it is a consideration and it is going to come up. So I just kind of wanted to line this out because there's a different kind of framework. So universal design principles, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So UDL is this research-based framework that guides the development of flexible learning environments, again, to accommodate individual learning differences. So again, it kind of comes back to that accommodations piece. And again, sounds very similar to differentiation, like I said. So multiple means of engagement. It's about providing choices to enhance motivation and relevance, hoping to foster a supportive environment that encourages risk-taking and persistence. When we look at multiple means of representation, again, that looking at presenting information in various formats, text, audio, visuals, to accommodate different learning styles, preferences, or needs, using tools that enhance understanding, such as graphic organizers, simulations, those sorts of things. And then for means of action and expression, looking at how students demonstrate what they know in various ways, whether it be projects, presentations, tests. Are there different ways that they can show you what they know than the way that you might have just originally envisaged? And so the benefits of UDL, as they report it, are this inclusivity. So it really does support diverse learners with disabilities, English language learners, and also gifted students. It's also known to help with engagement. So by personalizing the learning and taking into consideration students' needs, it will help improve that motivation engagement. And flexibility, so being able to adapt to individual learning preferences and needs, promoting independence for them to learn what you need them to do. So the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines, this is just taken off the CAST website, and I'm going to put a link in there so that you can look at it a little bit deeper. I'm going to be honest, this to me is a little bit, it can be a little bit confusing at times, but it does help just outline the perspective and the framework that UDL is working through. But something I find a little bit more helpful when it comes to planning is, and hopefully, yes, I linked it in, is this little document here. And again, I've linked this so that you can have access to it. So it just asks you some questions in those 3 areas of the framework, which will make it a little bit easier to consider. And you can probably see from this, if you're looking at it right now and reading it, that lots of these things we've already kind of discussed. through accommodations and through differentiation. So all of these things, really, I think the key theme that it's telling us to look at when it comes to inclusion and supporting special education students and English language learners, all students really, is looking at your lessons in terms of what you actually want them to learn, how they're going to learn it, and the resources and materials and the learning environment that you're going to do that with. And I think with all of these things, the common thing is just being aware, being open to different ways that you can present, students can produce, and how you can set the learning environment up. And I think if you go into lesson planning with those ideas in your mind to begin with, you're going to naturally produce a lesson that is very inclusive and that is meeting the needs of your students. Okay, so key considerations. Supporting special education students in general. Again, just going to go through it one more time. And I know I've kind of labored on this a lot, but it really is the most important thing for these students. What do you want all students to learn by the end of the lesson? It's going to make planning 100% more easier if you consider that. And it's going to benefit all students the most if you consider that first and foremost. How will they show you that they've learned what you need them to? What activities and tasks do they need to complete to do this? And that's where those frameworks come in. Is there a range of activities and tasks that they can do? Are there different ways of presenting material and information that is going to be more accessible for some students and going to be more helpful? What needs are in the classroom? What accommodations are actually required per the IEP? That's where that cheat sheet comes in that you can refer to. What accommodations will actually be helpful? They might not be in the IEP, but actually they would be significantly helpful in students achieving that goal. That's where that accommodations website comes in. And then look at obtaining and creating those resources for them. So some of those resources that I already mentioned, I've just put them in links here. Another one here is the IRIS Center. I'm going to click on that real quick. I don't know if you've come across this yet, but it has modules for different areas of special education and various other things. So looking at here, accommodations is at the top. It has different modules with different learning things and activities. So just wanted to show you this because there's a lot of really great stuff in here. And it's sometimes a well-hidden gem that gets overlooked. So if you do have an interest in any of these things, or you're looking for some information because you have to do a report or presentation or anything like that, this is a really good site to go to. I use it all the time, even in my role. So really great place to go. CAST, that's where Universal Design comes from. Carolyn Tomlinson, she kind of wrote a book on differentiated instruction. So I thought I'd link in that article for a little bit more information there. Accessibility, tech-based accessibility. So there are a lot of extensions that can be used for accommodations to help, especially if you have like text-to-speech, speech-to-text. You don't need to have special adaptive equipment for that. You can actually use the power of technology. So this is a link for you to look through that to help you in the future. There was one that when I was at MSSU, there was a site that I was steered to by one of the lecturers that still works there. And I lost what the site was. And I always think about it. And it had every single kind of adaptive and accessible web-based tool that you could think of. And it's so annoying that I've lost it. So you might talk to some of the special education professors over there and see if they have that, if you ever have that need. And then again, I just linked in the site to the accommodations right there. So thank you for listening. I'm sorry, this is kind of short and sweet. I didn't want to take up too much of your time. I also know I talk really quickly because I hate the sound of my voice and I hate talking to a computer screen. But hopefully you've kind of got a sense of inclusion and a framework and ideas for how to support students